with hospitality. So he took care of someone in a hospitable way. And if you think about it, that's what makes a family. That is actually what makes a family. If people in the family are aware of one another, if people in the family are hospitable to one another, that's what makes a family. And one of the key things you'll notice is if people in a family get mad at one another, they very seldom fight. You know, they very seldom have these different things go on. What you most notice is an end of hospitality. That's how people, I stop talking to you, or I stop doing the things that I know you like. That is basically what works. So basically what he established was a large family. And so people were made to understand that this was in fact the encountering of God. The second thing is that if you were to go into the monastic community, you'd find that their waking hours are divided into thirds. Okay? They have 1/3 of their day is spent in prayer and largely saying the office. The office that the priests and religious say today evolved from the monasteries. They're the ones who started that. So 1/3 of their day, waking hours, are spent in prayer. 1/3 of their waking hours are spent working. And 1/3 of their prayer, work, and study. 1/3 was spent in study. So they divided their day that way. And that is basically how their day went. But Benedict said the key to making your day work is to actually understand your day as all being worship. And that's how, like when I encounter a person with hospitality, I need to realize this is a liturgical event, not just a happening, okay? And as a result of that, there's some very interesting things. If you go into the monastic, let's say the barn in the monastery, you will notice the shovels and everything look brand new. And one of the reasons is the shovels are blessed each day before you use them. The shovels are washed, cleaned, and set up when you're finished using them. Because you must treat them like you do the vessels on the altar. Everything that they deal with, if you're dealing with animals, you deal with the animals as though they are this way. And those of you who've ever been to Switzerland or, let's say Switzerland, Germany, Austria, if you go to that area, one of the things that will most strike you there is farm animals. You know, if you look at a cow in a field in Switzerland, that cow could be in your living room. Okay, they're clean. They each have their own little bell. I mean, it's remarkable. That comes from the monasteries. The monasteries dealt with the animals in this sort of way. Everything was dealt with that way. If you happened to be a waiter and you were called to wait table, you would be called into the kitchen beforehand. All the waiters would kneel down, and you'd be blessed, almost like an ordination. And then you'd be given the privilege of carrying the food to the tables. It was all done with a liturgical way. The same thing in study. Because study was such a big thing at that time historically, you never needed to tell people to deal with books as though they were sacred. They did. But you needed to tell them to deal with farm implements and animals and things like that as though they were sacred. So he created a sacred environment. And when you're in a sacred environment, you tend to see the spiritual in everything. In the worldly stuff, you tend to see the spiritual in it. Everything was put together to encounter the Lord here and now, in unexpected places and unexpected people. And he put the whole thing together that way. Now, I said that Augustine left an ideal of a community, and that was basically his legacy. The legacy of Benedict is Benedict, when everything's said and done, left a rule. Okay? So what Benedict left behind was the rule. I'd like to look a little bit at his rule now. Okay? But understand the key that Benedict's spirituality is hospitality. But it's a rule that brings the community together to do this. There are 3 vows that you and I are familiar with: poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I want you to understand that those 3 things are required of every person. They're called in Roman Catholic theology the evangelical counsels. Now, the poverty that is required of, let's say, a priest is not the poverty that's required of a married man and woman. The poverty required of a priest does not require the funds necessary to put children through college. The poverty required of a married couple requires the finances necessary for that thing. So understand, poverty is a very different thing. I'll talk a little bit about what poverty is. The same thing with chastity. Chastity prohibits sexual involvement outside your state life. A married couple that are faithful to one another are practicing perfect chastity. A priest or a single person practices perfect chastity by not having sexual involvement with someone else. But everyone is involved with chastity. Again, chastity according to your place in life. Same thing with obedience. Every one of us, I don't think you need to explain that, because one of the things you really become aware of in life is the amount of obedience involved just in daily living. I think one of the great vices of children is you think that when you leave home and no longer have your parents around, you never have to be obedient again. You get over that with your first job. But anyway, you think that, that this is so obedience is ingrained. And understand it has to do with different things. One of the things that Benedict added was a vow of stability. So there were 4 vows for Benedict. And what the vow of stability is, if you become a Benedictine monk in Mount Angel, you may not move to another monastery. It is stable to the monastery itself. Okay? And so, now, the purpose of these vows is basically to create freedom from the temptations of life. And a person really needs to hold in mind the idea of freedom. And I'll give you an example that as a priest, for instance, with poverty, I am supposed to practice poverty to a certain level, but I must be very careful that poverty does not violate what my ministry is about. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a priest in the diocese who is very, very into poverty. And see, this is a real focus of the way he lives. And in many aspects of it, I would say he's inspirational. But I'll give you one aspect. If I'm in a serious accident and I'm hit by a car out here, I pray to God he is not the person called to anoint me. Because he has a 50-50 chance that he'll have to push his car here to anoint me, okay? His car is a disaster. Now, in order to administer the sacraments, you really do not need a Lexus. I'll admit that, okay? You actually do not need a Lexus. But you must have a functioning car. And the poverty that would take you away from a functioning car is a violation of poverty, because it violates your freedom to do your ministry, okay? Same thing with a parent. A parent that would choose, we'll just give all our money to the poor. Well, that violates the freedom to raise your children, take care of your children, have your own health care. I go through a whole bunch of things, okay? So we have to look at it. It's always freedom. And I'll give you an example. I was under the vow of poverty when I was in the Maris. I was in religious order at one time. And I had a room right next to a young man. This young man had the most magnificent stereo system I had ever seen in my life. It was a spectacular stereo system. And I would have killed, actually, for that stereo system. But the fact of the matter is, his major was music. And he needed that for what he was doing, okay? And the entire universe is thankful I didn't major in music, okay? So the idea was he had that. Now, I certainly had books, and I have some, particularly when you deal in Scripture, I have some extremely expensive books that are very small editions, because there are very few people interested in certain things you deal with in Scripture. But a stereo was not one of them, okay? Incidentally, you could have more fun with a stereo than a book, I'll tell you that. But anyway, the idea is to understand, understand poverty in that way. Poverty has to do with the excess and the excess that absorbs you, okay? Now, in a community, one of the things they do is that every person in the community gives everything to the community, and the community is required to supply what you need. If you're a member of a religious community and someone gives you a gift, you turn it into the community, even if it's something you need, because the community is supposed to give you what you need, okay? and they were, and